Phalanx. The phalanx is a heavy infantry formation that became one of the most famous military innovations in ancient Greek history. This formation was first used by the Greeks around the 8th century BC and became a symbol of their military superiority. In the phalanx, soldiers stood in tight rows with large shields, aspis, stacked on top of each other to create a strong protective wall. Long spears, sarissa, reaching 5 to 6 meters, were pointed forward, creating a sharp barrier that was difficult to penetrate. This strategy emphasized coordination, discipline, and cohesion between soldiers. The phalanx's main strength was its defensive prowess. In battle, the phalanx moves as a unit, so the enemy often has difficulty finding an opening. This formation also utilizes collective strength. Each soldier protects his exposed body parts with the shield of the soldier beside him. These advantages make the phalanx very effective in open terrain and against less organized forces. However, this formation has some disadvantages. The phalanx relied heavily on flat terrain, as it was difficult to maintain unity on uneven or rocky terrain. Its flexibility was also limited. If the enemy attacked from the sides or rear, the formation easily collapsed. Over time, military leaders like Alexander the Great improved the effectiveness of the phalanx by combining it with cavalry and flanking tactics. Under his command, the phalanx played an important role in the conquest of Macedonia, including victory at the Battle of Gaugamela. The influence of the phalanx was not limited to the Greeks. The Romans adopted elements of this formation in the development of their own tactics. Although eventually replaced by more flexible tactics, the phalanx remains an enduring symbol of military discipline and collective strength in the history of warfare. Cavalry Charge. The cavalry charge involves a rapid attack by horsemen, one of the most dramatic and effective military tactics in the history of warfare that uses speed, mass, and momentum to destroy enemy formations. In this charge, the soldiers are often armed with long lances, swords, or other weapons, while the horses provide additional strength with their power and speed. The cavalry charge's main advantage lies in the element of surprise. Traditional infantry formations are often unable to defend against surprise attacks by cavalrymen. The speed and force of momentum of cavalrymen can break up enemy formations, creating panic and chaos among their ranks. In history, this tactic was often used by nations such as the Mongols, medieval Europe, and the Persian Empire. One famous example is the Battle of Hastings in 1066, where Norman cavalry successfully defeated English infantry. However, the cavalry charge also has its weaknesses. Its effectiveness depended heavily on the battlefield. Uneven, rocky, or obstacle-filled terrain can hinder the movement of the horses and reduce the impact of the charge. In addition, it was vulnerable to long-range weapons such as arrows or spears used by defensive formations, such as phalanxes or troops with long lances. With the development of firearms, the role of the cavalry charge began to diminish in the modern era. However, over the centuries, this tactic became a symbol of courage, strength, and speed on the battlefield. To this day, the cavalry charge remains one of the most iconic military tactics in history, often depicted in art, literature, and popular culture. Siege warfare. Siege warfare is the oldest military tactic recorded in history, used to besiege and capture a heavily defended city or fortress. The strategy involves surrounding a target to cut off food, water, and communication supplies. The goal is to weaken the enemy physically and psychologically, forcing them to surrender without the need for direct combat. Siege methods have been used since the time of ancient Mesopotamia, around 2500 BC. One famous example is the Siege of Jericho in the biblical story, where the city walls collapsed after a long attack. In classical times, sieges became increasingly sophisticated with the development of tools of war, such as siege towers, ballistae, large throwing weapons, and simple artillery such as giant catapults. The Romans were renowned for their expertise in siege warfare. In the Siege of Masada, 73 to 74 AD, they built huge ramparts to access the hilltop fortress, showing their dedication and engineering expertise. In medieval times, the use of the trebuchet, a lever-action catapult, became a key tool in bringing down fortified walls. One famous example is the siege of Constantinople in 1453 by the Ottoman Empire, where giant cannons played an important role in breaching the city walls. However, siege warfare is also full of risks. It could take a very long time, and besiegers often had to face starvation, disease, or surprise attacks from enemy forces. As modern firearms developed, such as more sophisticated cannons, sieges became faster and more efficient, drastically changing military strategy. Until the modern era, siege warfare remained a symbol of overwhelming military power, where patience, technique, and technology combined to subdue the most intractable enemies. Guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare is a military strategy that involves surprise attacks by a small force against a larger, more organized enemy. It emphasizes mobility, the element of surprise, and knowledge of the terrain to defeat the enemy force. This tactic has been used throughout history by groups facing enemies with technological superiority or much larger numbers of troops. The history of guerrilla warfare can be traced back to ancient times. One of the earliest examples was the resistance of small tribes against the Roman Empire, such as the uprising of Germanic tribes in the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD. In Asia, guerrilla warfare was also played out by Vietnamese troops against Chinese invaders. The strategy further developed in the modern era, with famous examples such as the tactics used by George Washington in the American Revolutionary War, where American troops utilized surprise attacks to disrupt the British Army's supply lines. In the 20th century, guerrilla warfare reached its peak in major conflicts such as the Vietnam War and the Algerian War of Independence. Leaders such as Mao Zedong and Che Guevara formulated the doctrine of guerrilla warfare as a tool of revolution against colonial rule or authoritarianism. For example, the Viet Cong used jungles and underground tunnels to launch surprise attacks against U.S. forces, turning the battlefield into a strategic advantage. The advantage of guerrilla warfare is its flexibility. Small forces can avoid direct clashes with stronger enemies, striking when and where it suits them. However, this tactic requires the support of the local population and in-depth knowledge of the battlefield. Although guerrilla warfare often involves great risk to the troops, it proves that great military powers can be defeated through innovative strategies and unyielding persistence. Feigned retreat. Feigned retreat is a tactic that uses enemy psychology to create a deadly trap. In this tactic, troops deliberately pretend to lose and retreat from the battlefield. Enemies who see this opportunity are often tempted to pursue without paying attention to their formation, thus creating an opening that can be exploited for a planned counterattack. History shows the effectiveness of this tactic since ancient times. One of the earliest examples was a battle fought by the Scythians, who used light cavalry to feign escape from the Persian army, only to counterattack with full force when the enemy had been split up. A more famous example is the Battle of Hastings in 1066, where Norman forces under William the Conqueror used this tactic to defeat a larger English force. As the English troops pursued the retreating Normans, their formation disintegrated, giving the Norman cavalry the opportunity to counterattack in full force. In addition, the Mongols under Genghis Khan were one of the greatest users of this tactic. Mongol troops often feigned retreat to draw the enemy into a large trap where they could attack from all sides with their fast cavalry. The Mongols' success in this tactic was supported by intensive training and high troop discipline. However, this tactic came with risks. If the enemy was not provoked to pursue, this strategy could fail. Moreover, its success depended heavily on the troops' ability to retreat in an organized manner without completely collapsing. Feigned retreat is proof that strategy and ingenuity can defeat a larger force, making it one of the most interesting and effective tactics in military history. Terrain utilization. This military tactic utilizes geographical features to create a strategic advantage. Since ancient times, astute commanders have understood that the battlefield can be a powerful weapon, often determining the outcome of a battle before it even begins. Utilizing elements such as hills, rivers, forests, or swamps allows even small armies to fight larger enemies. One of the most famous examples of terrain utilization is the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC. In this battle, a much smaller Greek army under King Leonidas of Sparta used a narrow pass at Thermopylae to hold off a large Persian army for several days. The narrow location made the Persian numerical advantage ineffective, so only a small portion of their army could attack at once. In modern times, terrain is also smartly utilized. During World War II, the Soviet defenses at Stalingrad used the ruins of the city to create close-quarters warfare that hampered the superiority of German tanks and artillery. The ruined terrain allowed Soviet troops to hold out longer and launch successful counterattacks. Terrain utilization includes not only choosing favorable battle locations, but also creating favorable terrain, such as digging trenches or setting traps. For example, the Romans often built fortifications or earthen barriers to protect their troops while camping. However, utilizing terrain also requires in-depth knowledge of the location and the ability to predict enemy movements. If terrain is not properly utilized, it can become a weakness. For example, if troops are cornered in the wrong terrain, they can be destroyed easily. Terrain utilization is proof that military success often depends on strategic intelligence more than the number of troops or weapons at hand. Divide and conquer. Divide and conquer is a tactic that attempts to break an enemy force into smaller, more easily conquered parts. This military and political tactic is used throughout history to weaken larger enemies and overcome threats from coalitions or united groups. In a military context, divide and conquer often involves tactics to physically separate enemy forces on the battlefield. One of the most famous examples is Hannibal Barca's tactics in the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC. Hannibal used a deliberate curved formation to lure the Roman army into the center of the formation. When the Roman troops were trapped in the center, Hannibal surrounded them from the sides and rear, creating one of the most decisive victories in the history of warfare. In addition, this strategy was often used in colonial wars. The Roman Empire, for example, used divide and conquer to conquer vast territories by provoking conflict between local tribes. This tactic was also used by the British during the colonial era to gain control of India by exploiting internal divisions among local kingdoms. In politics, divide and conquer involves manipulating relationships between groups or individuals to create instability or division. An example is how Julius Caesar used this strategy to weaken his opponents during the Roman Civil War. However, this strategy has its downsides. Divide and conquer often requires good intelligence and a deep understanding of the enemy's group dynamics. If the enemy is aware of this plan, they may reunite to fight back. To this day, divide and conquer remains one of the most effective strategies, both in war and in political maneuvering, proving that intelligence and strategy are often more powerful than numbers. Flanking maneuver. Flanking maneuvers aim to surprise and destroy enemy formations with its military tactic of attacking from unexpected directions, such as the flanks or rear. This strategy is effective because the flanks and rear are often the most vulnerable parts of a formation, with minimal protection compared to the front. One of the most famous examples of flanking tactics was the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC. In this battle, the smaller Athenian army used a flanking maneuver to crush the larger Persian army. By weakening the center of their formation and strengthening the flanks, the Athenians surrounded the enemy from both sides, causing great chaos in the Persian ranks and eventually winning the battle. In the modern era, flanking tactics play an important role in military strategy. One brilliant example is the German blitzkrieg strategy during World War II. In the campaign in France in 1940, the Germans used armored vehicles and mechanized cavalry to attack quickly from the flanks, isolating and destroying enemy units before they could react. This strategy created a quick and decisive victory. The hallmark of this tactic was its psychological effect. Attacks from the flanks or rear often take the enemy by surprise, breaking up their formations and creating chaos. However, flanking maneuvers require speed, coordination, and a deep understanding of the battlefield. If performed without sufficient preparation, troops attempting to attack from the flanks can be isolated and destroyed. The flanking maneuver remains a highly effective tactic to this day, used in both large-scale military operations and small conflicts. The ability to attack in unexpected ways proves the importance of strategy and flexibility in winning battles. Combined arms. Combined arms, or the combination of different types of troops in battle. This tactic is used to create synergy between infantry, cavalry, artillery, and other elements to maximize their respective advantages. This strategy has been at the core of warfare since ancient times, where military leaders began to understand that one type of troop was not enough to deal with various situations on the battlefield. An early use of combined arms can be seen in Alexander the Great's military strategy. The Macedonian army combined the strength of phalanxes of heavy infantry, fast cavalry, and archers to create a formation that was difficult to defeat. In the Battle of Gaugamela, 331 BC, Alexander used the phalanx to hold the enemy in the center, while the cavalry attacked from the flanks, creating chaos in the Persian ranks. In medieval times, troop combinations became more complex. Armies like the English at the Battle of Agincourt, 1415, used longbow archers to weaken the French cavalry before the infantry moved forward. In those days, military leaders had to be able to time and coordinate with great precision. In the modern era, combined arms have become increasingly important with the emergence of new technologies. During World War I, infantry and artillery worked together to attack enemy trenches. In World War II, the Germans perfected this concept through blitzkrieg, where tanks, planes, and infantry moved together in a quick and coordinated attack. The advantage of combined arms lies in its ability to make up for the weakness of one type of force with the strength of another. However, the challenge is complex coordination, especially on a dynamic battlefield. Failure in communication or execution can make this strategy fall apart. To this day, combined arms remain the foundation of modern military doctrine, proving that an organized and coordinated force is often superior to sheer numbers. Diplomacy and alliances. Diplomacy and alliances are actually non-military strategies, but are often the key to winning wars and maintaining political stability. Historically, building relationships with other countries or groups has allowed leaders to strengthen their position without having to deploy troops to the battlefield. This strategy involves negotiation, cooperation, and sometimes manipulation to achieve political or military goals. Diplomacy has been an important part of history since ancient times. Early examples are peace treaties, such as the Treaty of Kadesh between Egypt and the Hittite Empire, 1259 BC, one of the world's first written peace treaties. In ancient Greece, cities like Athens and Sparta often formed military alliances to deal with external threats, such as in the Greco-Persian War. In medieval times, diplomacy played an important role in forming political marriages to create dynastic alliances. For example, the marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile united the two great Spanish kingdoms, enabling them to launch the Reconquista and finance the expeditions of Christopher Columbus. In the modern era, military alliances such as NATO and the Warsaw Pact reflect the importance of international cooperation in the face of common threats. World Wars I and II are examples where grand alliances played a decisive role in shaping the course of history. Alliances can also be used to weaken enemies indirectly by isolating them from potential allies. The advantage of diplomacy and alliances is their ability to reduce direct conflict and strengthen strategic positions without sacrificing a lot of resources. However, diplomacy also comes with risks, such as betrayal or failure to maintain relationships. Weak alliances can collapse, resulting in greater instability. Diplomacy and alliances remain relevant today, proving that strategy behind the negotiating table is often as important as victory on the battlefield.